Pfeifer, and I came from Winter, South Dakota, Tripp County. I enlisted in the National Guard the 5th of February 1941, and we entered active service the 10th. There were 13 of us that had been in this CC camp over at Wall, Company 2754. And for some reason, Joe Culver, Joe Manders, Darrell Bledsoe talked a bunch of us into joining the Company D 109th Engineers. And we hitchhiked through snow and blizzards down there to enlist. So anyway, we mobilized and went to Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. That was, I guess, our transition from boys into men. The people down there didn't treat us very nice, and it's such a coincidence that my wife of today is from Alexandria, Louisiana. Then we, after Pearl Harbor, we moved out to Fort Dix and wound up in Ireland, where we stayed until November of 1942. We were the first combat troops to the European theater. And then we went to North Africa and went all through the African campaign, and from there to Italy, and we spent the remainder of our lives, it seemed like, in Italy. The worst memory I have of the whole war is our sojourn at Casino. It was such a terrible thing. The smell of rotting Germans laying in front of our positions, and hogs fighting over the entrails of dead men. And it was mud and cold, and I think it ruined our whole division, looking back on it.
Did you were supporting up on the mountain or down in the town? You were up on the mountain, weren't you?
We were up on the top there.
Yeah.
We were clear around in back of the Germans at one time. Mm-hmm. And then they finally pulled us out and sent us to Anzio. And we were in Anzio. I think the funniest thing that I could remember of the whole war was Jim McAllister and I getting into Rome and commandeering a horse and wagon, and people were pouring vino on us, and we had brandy, Martell's 5-star brandy. You know, it was so good. I was a PFC during the whole war. I got promoted to corporal one morning, and that afternoon when I found out about it, I went to Sergeant Nelson, told him I refused to be a corporal. He said, why? I said, all the corporals get killed. And I didn't want to get killed. I wanted to live through the war. And so I spent the rest of the war in Italy, came back and was discharged in July of 1945. And I kind of drifted around and re-enlisted shortly after. Wound up making the Army my career. I retired as a first sergeant.
You got away from the first PFC job, though.
I got away from the PFC job. But as a PFC, I did a little bit of everything. I was a machine gunner, and I helped pick up mines, lay minefields, ran a mine detector, and I'm just general purpose all around PFC, pour something. We were laying a minefield, and the corporal in the company of my squad stepped on a mine. They were British tank mines. They carried 8 pounds of TNT, as I recall. And they weren't supposed to go off just by somebody stepping on them, but Doug McRae was a big man. He stepped on it, and there were only 2 or 3 of us still physically able to move around after that mine went off. Hill 609, in fact, I climbed to the top of it. You just look out over the whole country. Yep, it was a magnificent view of the country. And if the Germans had any binoculars, which they did, they kept track of all of us. And then when the war was over, we went back to Oran. The first river I remember crossing, it was during a tremendous rainstorm. And there were no Bailey bridges or anything available. So one of our engineer lieutenants, he figured out that if we prefabbed a bridge out of wood planks and then roll it into the river and push rock and stuff in around it. They could get the tanks across. Well, we spent all night building that bridge, and it was either Casey or Bledsoe, who was the bulldozer operator. They pushed that big box, I'd call it a box, open-ended box. They pushed it into the river, and it just disintegrated. That was the end of the bridge. And I don't remember, I guess we waited till the water went down before we got across. I was with a lieutenant and his driver, and we were widening a trail. The Germans had blown up the bridge, so the bypass around it, we were widening that. Lieutenant, what was it, Fulbright, and a guy from the 133rd, all by himself in a Jeep, come wheeling around, and he ran his Jeep high up on the bank and upset it, right on top of him. And Lieutenant Fulbright and his driver took off to go get somebody to help get the guy out. And the guy said, help me, get me out of here before it catches fire. And for some reason, God gave me the strength to lift that Jeep off of that man enough to get him out of there. Yeah, he had a broken shoulder blade, I believe, in it. But he got out of there, and he said that man should get a medal. And I was never into that stuff. I got wounded, never even went to the medics for it. So I didn't even get the Purple Heart. And a few years ago, all the guys, they said, you were the first one to get the Purple Heart. And I said, no. So they were determined to get one for me. They wrote to John McCain and Helen Chenoweth, who was congressman from Idaho. But the regulations say that you have to be treated by a medic to get the Purple Heart. We broke out as infantry. And that's when we were combination engineer in infantry. We pushed that Bangalore torpedo out, screwed it together. Those were 20-foot sections, as I remember. And we pushed an awful lot of the Bangalore torpedo into the German positions before we blew it.